My name is Chloe, and my presentation is going to be about affirmative action, its history, and everything surrounding its abolishment. So, what is affirmative action? In a legislative sense, it was initially put in place to, quote unquote, improve employment or educational opportunities for members of minority groups and women, as described by Britannica.com. It was initially drafted and signed during the height of the civil rights movements in America in an effort to push for better representation and equal opportunity across the nation. This systemic issue was especially prominent in federal and educational spaces, such as colleges and universities. On the other hand, affirmative action in a social sense allowed for minorities and women to assume positions and receive opportunities they previously never thought possible. Some examples of influential figures who got to where they are today due to affirmative action include Branch Rickey, making history as the first African-American player on the all-white Brooklyn Dodgers baseball team, as well as Katherine Johnson, who is the frontwoman of NASA's Equal Opportunity Program. A more detailed history of affirmative action begins in 1961 in the form of Executive Order 10925, signed by President John F. Kennedy. It was the first ever policy to implement affirmative action, the order specifically stating that federal contractors should take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are treated equally without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. The order was expanded upon in 1965, where President Lyndon B. Johnson issued Executive Order 11246, enforcing federal contractors to not discriminate in employment and take affirmative action to ensure equal opportunity based on race, color, religion, and national origin. The Office of Federal Contract Compliance was also created during this time to ensure the adherence of these executive orders, and by 1971, the order was amended to also include women. Along with this, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was signed by President Richard Nixon, which required agencies to submit an affirmative action plan to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for things such as hiring, placement, and advancement of individuals with disabilities. When affirmative action was first introduced, Ivy Leagues and many other elite, predominantly white institutions began to open their doors for higher rates of minority enrollment. Along with the heightened statistics of minority enrollment, such students are able to have the luxury of a high-quality education, professional degrees, as well as having increased chances of making a higher income in comparison to what they could have made should they have been rejected. Even outside of Ivy League schools, minority students have received worlds more representation in higher education as a whole. But the benefits for minorities in areas of higher education don't end there. As highlighted in a Harvard Graduate School article, increased minority enrollment had led to more empathy towards minorities and the issues they experience, and are also reported to participate more civically even after graduation. Overall, affirmative action helps students to pursue higher quality education, increase diversity on college campuses, and create a more empathetic society as a whole. However, since affirmative action's creation, there have been a number of cases and restrictions against it, which ultimately led to its devastating abolishment in 2023. The first case to try and combat affirmative action was Regents of the University of California versus Bakke, otherwise known as the Bakke decision of 1978. In this case, Alan Bakke, a white Californian man, had applied for the medical school at the University of California but was rejected twice. As a result, he filed a suit against the university, citing that the academic performance of many of the minority students at that school were of lower quality in comparison to himself, and cited his rejection as an instance of, quote-unquote, reverse discrimination. As a result, affirmative action remained constitutional, but the usage of racial quotas was invalidated. In 1989, the Supreme Court continued to enact significant restrictions on affirmative action. The court began to give greater merit to claims of reverse discrimination and completely outlawed the usage of minority set-asides. Along with this, institutions having any sort of minority preference also had many restrictions placed upon them. The next major case against affirmative action took place in 1995 in the form of Adirondack Constructors versus Pena, as the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that affirmative action programs were unconstitutional if they did not fulfill a quote-unquote compelling governmental interest. In 1996, California took immense strides against affirmative action with the creation of the California Civil Rights Initiative, or Proposition 209. The proposition in question was made to prohibit all governmental institutions from giving any sort of preferential treatment to individuals on the basis of race or sex. The Supreme Court also upheld the constitutionality of the proposition in November of 1997, as they refused to hear a challenge to its enforcement. Soon after Prop 209's establishment, many other states took inspiration from California and began implementing it into local law. That same year, a lower Supreme Court ruling was upheld for the Hopwood versus the University of Texas Law School in regards to affirmative action. It was argued that there was no compelling state interest to warrant using race as a factor in admissions decisions, according to Britannica.com. The major rulings against affirmative action all seem to come together in the form of the 2003 Bollinger decisions. This particular scenario actually involves two separate cases, the first of which entering around this undergraduate admissions policy of the University of Michigan, and the second being the University of Michigan's law school. It was claimed that the policy violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, yet the law schools did not. These two class action cases came about for similar reasons due to the California versus Bakke case, as two white applicants with sufficient credentials were denied from the Michigan schools and cited their reason for denial being rooted in quote-unquote reverse discrimination. While these decisions did not restrict affirmative action more than it already had been, it laid the groundwork for future decisions that ultimately ruled affirmative action as completely unconstitutional. The specific cases that resulted in affirmative action's abolishment were Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard College and Students for Fair Admissions versus University of North Carolina. It was ruled between both cases that the admissions policies of Harvard College and the University of North Carolina, which only considered race in applications for the sake of a diverse student body, violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which is stated to prohibit states from denying any person the equal protection of the laws. Despite the little correlation between the clause and what it has to do with affirmative action, it was officially ruled unconstitutional as a result of these cases. Already, the abolishment of affirmative action has had impacts on particular college admissions. At MIT, there has already been a sharp 8% drop in black students admitted to the school, along with Washington University having a 4% drop and Tufts University having a 3% drop. Along with black enrollment, there has also been a 6% drop in Asian American enrollment at Yale. However, in spite of these drops in the supposed unconstitutionality of affirmative action, there are various other schools that try their best to maintain diversity amongst their student body by altering certain admissions conditions, such as essay prompts, increasing financial aid, and trying to implement race-neutral alternatives into their admissions and acceptance processes. Most of the data for that slide was gathered from a Vox article, and this is the chart that was featured in said article, which showcases the exact universities that experienced a drop in minority student enrollment. While there are some increases showcased here, black enrollment as a whole has taken the most notable drop across all of the schools listed here, as it is by far the most consistent drop amongst all of the others. In this current era of America, minorities are more at risk than ever, both due to a sharp incline in bigotry and the mass rollbacks of DEI programs and initiatives. While the future may seem bleak with everything that has been going on, it is important to stay hopeful and unified now more than ever. It is imperative to remember the importance of community, as even if you aren't a minority, any amount of support during these times means something. Make sure to exercise your right of protest to go out and fight to put an end to this epidemic of hate and apathy sweeping our nation. Nobody deserves to feel excluded or discriminated against on any basis, but the only way to fight back against hate and hopelessness is resilience and love. I do not want to end this presentation on a depressing note, so as a parting message, I want to say to all of my fellow minority students that it will be all right. We will get through this. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel so long as we stick together. Thank you.